close your eyes and drift with me into the warm sands and starlit skies of the ancient Nile Valley. Far to the south of Egypt, where the river narrows and the cataracts rumble, there once rose a mighty kingdom, a kingdom shrouded in gold, mystery, and resilience. This is the story of the Kingdom of Kush, a Black African civilization, whose legacy echoes along the banks of the Nile like a lullaby whispered by time. Tonight, we leave behind the familiar tales of pharaohs in Giza and temples at Luxor, and instead journey into the lands of Nubia, into deserts laced with the shimmer of quartz, into valleys lined with pyramids, smaller but steeper than Egypt's, and into cities where Meroitic scribes wrote in a language we still cannot fully understand. The Kingdom of Kush was not merely Egypt's southern neighbor. At times, it was its conqueror. At others, its partner. And always, its mirror. The Kushites were architects of empire, patrons of temples, and builders of pyramids. Their history spans over 2,000 years, from the twilight of Egypt's Middle Kingdom to the dawn of Christianity along the Nile. As we drift through the centuries together, we will explore how the Kushites rose from powerful chiefdoms in Kerma, how they marched north to rule Egypt as the Black Pharaohs, how they retreated, adapted, and flourished again in the city of Meroe, where iron furnaces burned day and night, and how their culture left its imprint on all of northeastern Africa. This story is woven not only from battles and kings, but from the rhythms of everyday life, pottery and pyramid, song and script, river and reed. You'll hear of queens who ruled with might, of traders crossing the Red Sea with incense and gold, and of temples that faced the stars. Let the gentle current of the Nile carry you tonight. Let the memory of Kush unfold slowly, softly, like a linen curtain swaying in the desert breeze. With each chapter, we will travel deeper, first through the origins at Kerma, then the age of Napatan conquest, through the golden height of Meroe, and finally into the twilight and enduring legacy of this forgotten empire. So settle in, let your breath slow. You are now entering a world where sand meets river, where ancient voices whisper from stone, and where history becomes a lullaby. We begin at the beginning. We open our eyes, still half in dream, and find ourselves in a land where the sun gilds every grain of sand. The Nile here is narrower, swifter. We are far upriver from the great pyramids of Egypt, in a place ancient Egyptians called Ta-Seti, the land of the bow. This is Nubia, and at its heart, in the 3rd millennium BCE, rises one of Africa's earliest urban centers, Kerma. The Kingdom of Kerma, often considered the first incarnation of the later Kushite state, grew between the 1st and 4th cataracts of the Nile. These natural rapids marked both barriers and bridges between cultures, and Kerma, nestled in the Fertile Crescent near the 3rd cataract, became a crossroads, a place where the African interior met the kingdoms of the north. The Kerma people were not Egyptians. Their language is unknown, but their culture was distinct and sophisticated. They built mud brick temples and palaces, used copper tools, and crafted pottery so fine it gleamed like burnished obsidian. Their artists mastered the deep reds and black hues of Nubian ceramics, their silhouettes rounded and elegant. These vessels, unearthed by archaeologists, are still considered some of the most beautiful ceramics of the ancient world. At its height, around 1700 BCE, Kerma was a powerful kingdom, ruled from a royal city that boasted a large temple complex and a massive structure known as the Western Defufa. This Defufa, whose name comes from a Nubian word for mud brick buildings, was a multi-story ceremonial center that loomed over the desert. It was built not for the living, but for the gods, or perhaps the dead. Its thick walls once glowed in the sunlight, crowned with altars and stairs to the heavens. Just beyond the royal city lay the necropolis. Here, The Kerma elite were buried in enormous tumuli-earthen mounds that could reach over 300 feet in diameter. Beneath these mounds, bodies were laid on beds in subterranean chambers. They were surrounded by goods, pottery, jewelry, weapons, and in some cases, the remains of attendants. These royal burials suggest a stratified society with a strong religious foundation and elaborate funerary traditions, echoes of which would appear later in the Kushite pyramids of Napata and Meroe. Kerma's rise coincided with the decline of Egypt's Middle Kingdom, allowing it to grow in power and wealth. The Kermans traded ivory, gold, ebony, incense, and cattle. They raised vast herds of long-horned cattle, a symbol of prestige and abundance. Their caravans stretched deep into sub-Saharan Africa, connecting them to peoples even further south. But while Kerma flourished, tensions with Egypt grew. To the Egyptians, the land of Kush was both a source of wealth and a potential threat. Nubia offered access to precious gold mines and served as a buffer against the unknown regions of Inner Africa. Pharaohs launched repeated campaigns southward, hoping to control the trade routes and mines. But Kerma resisted. At times, the Kerma kings allied with Egypt's enemies such as the Hyksos, creating a buffer of power that Egypt could not ignore. Kerma warriors, armed with composite bows and clad in ostrich feather cloaks, became a symbol of southern strength. Around 1500 BCE, however, Egypt's fortunes reversed. Under Pharaoh Thutmose I, the armies of the 18th dynasty pushed deep into Nubia. They sacked Kerma and brought the region under Egyptian rule for the next 5 centuries. But conquest did not erase the identity of the Kushite people. Far from being simply a province of Egypt, Nubia under Egyptian rule became a land of hybrid cultures. Nubian craftsmen adopted Egyptian forms while retaining their own traditions. Temples dedicated to Amun sprang up beside local shrines. In tombs, Egyptian hieroglyphs were carved beside native art. Kushite elites served in Egyptian armies and even became governors. This period, sometimes called Egyptian Nubiawas, a time of cultural mingling. It laid the groundwork for a later rebirth. When Egyptian power began to wane again around 1100 BCE, it was the Nubians' descendants of Kerma, keepers of both African and Egyptian traditions, who would rise once more. And they would not merely reclaim their homeland. They would become kings of Egypt itself. But that is still to come. Let us pause here, beside the Defufa of Kerma, under a Nubian night sky. The stars flicker, ancient and familiar. The air is scented with acacia and desert wind. In the distance, the Nile flows like a ribbon of starlight. Reflect now on how even in forgotten ruins, civilizations breathe. In clay and cattle, in burial mounds and trade routes, in every pot shard and polished stone, we find the quiet beginnings of greatness. Drift with me now, as the past folds into shadow and the future of Kush begins to stir. The sands shift, the centuries pass, and the power of Egypt, once towering, now flickers like a candle in the wind. As the great dynasties of the north crumble, something ancient and powerful awakens in the south. From the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal, overlooking the Nile at Napata, the Kingdom of Kush is reborn not as a mere reflection of Egypt, but as its heir. We have entered the Napatan period, beginning around 800 BCE. The people of Kush, once under Egyptian rule, have absorbed and transformed what they inherited. They speak Egyptian in temples, but their hearts remain proudly Nubian. Their rulers pray to Amun, the ram-headed god of Thebes, but they do so in their own tongue before their own priests. Their warriors still wear ostrich feathers, and their queens wield authority alongside kings. And now, as Egypt grows weak and fragmented, the kings of Kush see an opportunity not to imitate, but to rule. Their capital, Napata, lies beneath Jebel Barkala flat-topped sandstone mountain, revered as the dwelling place of Amun. Here, temples rise with carved columns and sanctuaries cut into rock. Rituals echo through sacred courtyards, blending Egyptian rites with Kushite style. The city becomes the spiritual heart of a kingdom stretching from deep Nubia to the northern delta. It is here that one of Kush's most legendary kings emerges. Piye, also spelled Pianki. Piye is both devout and ambitious. In his famous victory stela, inscribed in Egyptian script but brimming with Kushite pride, he describes how he set out to reunify Egypt not through cruelty, but through righteousness. He believed himself the rightful restorer of Ma'at, the divine order. In the late 8th century BCE, Piye marches north. His campaign is swift and decisive. One by one, the squabbling city-states of Egypt fall before him. Hermopolis, Heracleopolis, Memphisiach bows to the king from Kush. Piye does not plunder. He demands purification, oaths, and offerings to Amun. In Memphis, he washes himself, enters the temple, and emerges not as a foreign invader, but as pharaoh. He then returns to Napata, leaving behind loyal governors and monuments. His stela proclaims, "None dared to raise a hand against me." And indeed, none did. Thus begins the 25th dynasty of Egypta, dynasty of Kushite kings, often called the Black Pharaohs. For nearly a century, Kushite rulers reign over both Egypt and Nubia. Among them is Shabaka, Piye's successor, who preserves ancient Egyptian wisdom by commissioning copies of decaying texts. There is Taharka, the most famous of them all, a warrior and builder who confronts the mighty Assyrians. And Tanutamani, the last to dream of restoring full control over the Nile Valley. Taharka, in particular, embodies the fusion of African and Egyptian power. He builds massive temples in both Thebes and Nubia. His image is etched on walls across the Nile, muscular, regal, his features distinctly African. He battles the Assyrians, who are expanding aggressively from Mesopotamia. Though ultimately forced to retreat, his defiance echoes through history. But the dream of a unified Nile proves fragile. By the mid-7th century BCE, Assyria's military superiority becomes overwhelming. They sack Thebes. Kushite forces fall back, and the 25th dynasty comes to an end in Egypt. A new dynasty, Egyptian in name, but backed by foreign power stakes the throne. Yet while Egypt is lost, Kush survives. The kings retreat to Napata, still rulers of a vast Nubian kingdom. They no longer wear the double crown of Egypt, but they remain powerful and revered. They continue to build pyramids, many more than the Egyptians ever did, steep-sided and elegant, clustered at El Kuru and Nuri. These tombs rise like stone arrows pointing to the heavens. Inside, the walls are painted with stars and gods. The dead are laid to rest with gold amulets, fine pottery, and even chariots. In the tomb of Piye, archaeologists discovered not only lavish burial goods, but the remains of 4 horses, symbolic, noble, and silent. In Napata, queens are not mere consorts. They are Kandakesa Meroitic title, sometimes rendered as Candace. These royal women act as regents, priestesses, and sometimes sole rulers. Their images appear in temples, their names etched on stelae. Their influence will only grow as Kush continues to evolve. And through it all, the memory of Egypt remains, but it is now filtered through a Kushite lens. The people of Napata honor Amun and Osiris, but they speak their native tongue. Their script is Egyptian at first, but soon new symbols begin to emerge, a hybrid writing system that hints at the independence to come. For now, though, Napata reigns as the ceremonial and political center of Kushite life. Caravans bring incense and ivory from the south. Temples hum with chants. The Nile gleams under the Nubian sun, nourishing crops and carrying the past along its banks like a slow, eternal hymn. Let us pause here, in the golden age of Napata. The evening has settled. The stars wheel above Jebel Barkal, casting long shadows across the stone pylons of the temple. Somewhere, a priest lights a torch and disappears into the inner sanctum. The scent of burnt myrrh rises on the night breeze. Sleep, like memory, lingers in sacred places, and in the hush of this ancient capital, the story of Kush drifts gently onward. The Nile flows ever onward, and with it, the destiny of Kush shifts. As the influence of Napata wanes, a new center rises farther downstream, nestled between the 5th and 6th cataracts. The land here is greener, the rains more generous, and the earth rich with iron-bearing stone. This is Meroe, the new heart of the Kushite kingdom, where the past meets transformation. Around the 6th century BCE, the royal court relocates from Napata to Meroe. The reasons are many: geographical, economic, political. By moving south, Kush shields itself from northern threats and taps into new trade routes and agricultural lands. Meroe's location, near rich iron ore deposits and forests of acacia for charcoal, makes it an ideal hub for metal production. Soon, the city begins to hum with the clang of iron tools and weapons, the sound of a civilization forging its own future. And it is here that the Kingdom of Kush enters a new and distinct phase, sometimes called the Meroitic period. The art, language, and customs of Meroe reveal a civilization confident in its identity. The influence of Egypt still lingers, but it no longer defines the kingdom. Instead, Meroe cultivates its own script, its own gods, and its own ways. Let us wander the streets of ancient Meroe together. Imagine the markets, rows of woven mats where merchants sell dates, barley, and ostrich feathers. The air is thick with the scent of roasting grain and perfume oils. Blacksmiths bend over roaring furnaces, turning iron into plows, spears, and tools. Children chase one another between the courtyards of sandstone homes. In the distance, temple bells ring. The city is vibrant, cosmopolitan, and thriving. Trade links stretch east to the Red Sea, west into the Sahara, and south into the African interior. Kushite caravans carry ivory, gold, frankincense, and exotic animals: leopards, giraffes, even elephants. Greek and Roman sources speak of Kush as a rich and mysterious land, ruled by powerful queens and flush with resources. It is in this period that we encounter some of the most remarkable rulers of ancient Africa, the Kandaks, royal women who hold immense authority. These queen mothers, or regents, often ruled in their own right. Among them is the legendary Amanirenas, who faced down the mighty Roman Empire. Around 25 BCE, during the reign of Roman Emperor Augustus, a conflict arises between Kush and Rome. The Romans have taken over Egypt and seek to expand their control south. But the Kandake Amanirenas refuses to yield. She leads her armies north. Some accounts say she fought alongside them in battle, her one eye covered with a regal patch. Her forces sack several Roman outposts and even damage statues of Augustus. In retaliation, the Romans march south, burning Napata. But the Kandake negotiates shrewdly. In the end, a peace treaty is signed. Kush remains independent. No tribute is paid. No Roman garrisons are placed in Meroe. The Kandake has preserved her kingdom's sovereignty. Her defiance echoes through time, a symbol of African leadership and resilience. Within Meroe, temples continue to rise. Some are Egyptian in form, dedicated to Amun and Isis, while others reveal local deities with unfamiliar names. Apadimak, the lion-headed god of war and fertility, becomes a favorite. His temples are unique, with scenes of kings and queens offering sacrifices, standing proud in tall, feathered crowns. Perhaps most mysterious of all is the Meroitic script. Appearing around the 2nd century BCE, this writing system includes a hieroglyphic and a cursive form. Though inspired by Egyptian writing, it represents a new language altogether, one still not fully understood today. Inscriptions carved into temple walls and funerary stelae offer glimpses into names, titles, and prayers, but the full meaning remains elusive. What we do know is that Meroe had its own scribes, its own scholars, and likely its own literature. The capital may have included schools, archives, and libraries now lost to time. And beyond the temples and palaces lie the pyramids. Yes, the pyramids of Meroe, over 200 of them, dot the desert like a stone forest. These structures are smaller than those of Giza, but more numerous and steeper in design. They mark the tombs of kings, queens, and nobles. Each one is unique, with decorated chapels and burial chambers beneath. Inside, murals depict the journey to the afterlife, boats sailing the underworld, gods receiving offerings, souls weighed on cosmic scales. Though many were looted in later centuries, their grandeur remains. Standing among the pyramids of Meroe, one feels the weight of time and the breath of eternity. Life in the Meroitic kingdom was rich and varied. In the countryside, farmers grew sorghum and barley. Cattle herders tended their herds, adorned with beads and feathers. Craftspeople worked in gold, bronze, and ivory. Musicians played harps and drums. Dancers performed at festivals honoring the gods. Women enjoyed prominent roles not only as kandakes, but as priestesses, traders, and landowners. In tombs, women are often depicted as dignified and independent, their status clear from their titles and adornments. As the centuries passed, Meroe remained strong and adaptive. It was not isolated. It engaged with the wider world, negotiating with Rome, trading with India, and exchanging ideas with neighboring peoples. The kingdom absorbed influences, transformed them, and projected its own power outward. But all empires eventually change. By the 4th century CE, signs of decline emerge. Trade routes shift. Drought and desertification may have strained resources. Internal strife is possible. And new powers, particularly the kingdom of Aksum to the southeast, begin to rise. In time, Meroe will fall. But for now, in this moment, the city stands. Let us stand with it. Let us walk its colonnaded avenues under a Nubian moon. Let the desert winds brush against sandstone walls, the scent of charcoal and incense fill the air. The iron forges glow like stars fallen to earth. The pyramids rise behind us like sleeping kings. Meroe is not just a city, it is a legacy. And as you drift gently into sleep, remember this, that in a world of pharaohs and emperors, a black African kingdom flourished for over 1,000 years, forging iron, writing its own language, and crowning its queens. As the morning sun lifts above the horizon, it casts long golden shadows across the banks of the Nile. We are not in a palace today, nor beside a pyramid. Instead, we find ourselves walking the quiet paths of a village or a town in the Kingdom of Kush. Perhaps near Meroe, perhaps farther south, in the countryside that nourishes the cities. Here, the world moves slowly. The scent of baked grain rises from clay ovens. Goats bleat softly in the distance. The Nile, ever present, murmurs its age-old lullaby. What was daily life like for the people of Kush? It begins, as in many ancient societies, with the earth. Farmers rise with the sun and guide cattle to graze in the fields. The land yields millet, barley, and sorghum staple grains that are ground, cooked, and shared. Some people fish with woven nets. Others paddle small reed boats across the river, ferrying goods and gossip between nearby settlements. In towns, artisans shape clay into fine pottery. They work in workshops passed down through generations. Others labor at the forge, stoking the great fires of iron smelting. It is hard work, but respected iron is more valuable than gold in this world. It tills the fields, defends the kingdom, and binds together the bones of empire. In the market, women barter and buy. They wear linen wraps or brightly dyed cotton. Beads made from shell and stone hang around their necks. Children trail behind them, chasing stray chickens or giggling in the shade of acacia trees. Merchants call out prices. There are goods here from far-off places, incense from Arabia, glass beads from the Mediterranean, spices from beyond the Red Sea, and presiding over this vibrant life is faith woven into every hour of the day. The people of Kush worship many gods. Some are familiar to us: Amun, the hidden one, whose temple at Jebel Barkal rivals any in Thebes. Some are unique to Kush: Apedamak, the lion god of war and strength; Sebiumeker, a god of fertility and creation; Amasemi, the moon goddess and protector of queens. Temples are not just places of worship. They are centers of life sites of learning, law, and community. Priests oversee rituals, offer incense, and interpret signs from the gods. They care for sacred animals, prepare food for offerings, and guard the scrolls and inscriptions of divine knowledge. And within these temples, we find something remarkable: the Meroitic scripta writing system, all their own. This script appears around the 2nd century BCE and continues for several hundred years. It has two forms: Meroitic cursive, used on papyrus and ostraca, and Meroitic hieroglyphs, carved into stone for religious or royal use. It contains around 24 symbols, some representing consonants, others full syllables. Though modern scholars have deciphered its alphabet, much of the Meroitic language remains untranslated, its full grammar and vocabulary still veiled in silence. Yet what we do understand speaks volumes. We see names, titles, prayers. We see formulas of kingship and addresses to the gods. The script proves that the Kushites were not merely borrowing Egyptian literacy. They were reshaping it, using it to express their own culture in their own voice. And what of the home? A typical Kushite house is modest, but well built. Made of mud brick, with thatched or flat roofs, these homes often contain a central courtyard where cooking and socializing take place. Water is drawn from the Nile or from wells. Meals include porridge, lentils, bread, and fruits like dates and figs. Beer is brewed from sorghum and shared during meals or festivals. Families are central to Kushite society. Both men and women can own property, pass down land, and participate in trade. Inscriptions and tomb scenes show women acting as priestesses, landowners, and even builders. The high status of women in Kushite culture is one of its most distinctive features. In art, we see women with elaborate wigs, ornate jewelry, and elegant dress. Queens are often depicted standing proudly beside kings, sometimes towering over them in scale, an artistic symbol of divine or political strength. Children learn from elders, both in the family and in temple schools. Some may learn to write. Others are taught the skills of agriculture, smithing, weaving, or trade. Music and storytelling are part of life. Harps, lyres, flutes, and drums accompany rituals and celebrations. And always, there is the river. The Nile is more than water. It is a guide, a guardian, a source of fertility, and a pathway to the gods. In funeral rites, the soul is imagined as sailing down the river to the land of the dead. The cycle of inundation and growth mirrors the soul's journey, death, rebirth, and eternity. Even in burial, the daily and the divine intertwine. Kushite tombs are often adorned with amulets and carved scenes. They show not only prayers and gods, but also feasts, harvests, and domestic life. The afterlife, to the Kushite mind, is a continuation, a better, eternal version of earthly life. One eats, rests, dances, and honors the gods forever. As we move toward the end of the Meroitic period, we begin to sense the signs of change. The language begins to fade from inscriptions. The once busy forges grow quieter. Trade patterns shift. But for centuries more, the rhythms of daily life continue. A mother grinds grain at her hearth. A boy casts a fishing line from the riverbank. A blacksmith wipes the sweat from his brow as he finishes a curved blade. A priest chants in a language now silent. The moon rises over the desert, and through it all, the spirit of Kush endures. As we lie still, listening to the soft pulse of history, we realize that civilizations are not only built by kings and queens, but by countless unseen hands. Hands that baked bread, that drew symbols on pottery, that cared for children, tended fires, and planted seeds. They too are part of this story. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts settle. The fire of Meroa still flickers in the dark, a gentle warmth across time. Time flows like the Nile, unrelenting, winding, and ever-changing. By the 4th century CE, the Kingdom of Kush had endured for more than 1,000 years. Its cities had thrived, its kings and queens had ruled both north and south, and its culture had shaped a unique path between Africa, Egypt, and the wider ancient world. But even the greatest civilizations are not immune to change. Meroa, once vibrant and fortified with iron and gold, begins to face pressures both within and beyond. The world around it is shifting. Trade routes that once flowed through Nubia are now being drawn eastward, toward the rising Red Sea ports and the trade empires of Arabia and India. Wealth, which had once poured into Meroa through desert caravans and river barges, starts to trickle. Internally, the strain becomes evident. The once booming iron industry appears to wane. Charcoal supplies may have been depleted, leading to deforestation around the capital. The city's elite continue to build and rule, but the grandeur of earlier generations softens. Inscriptions become less frequent. The once fluent Meroitic script slowly fades from view. The state religion, too, becomes quieter at its temples, no longer bustling with the same intensity of offerings and rites. Yet the people remain. Farmers still plant sorghum along the riverbanks. Traders still travel across the savannah. Priests still whisper prayers into the breeze. Daily life carries on, but the unity and central power of the Kushite state begins to fragment. And then, from the east, a new power rises. The kingdom of Aksum, centered in what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea, emerges as a commercial and military force in the Horn of Africa. Rich in gold, trade networks, and ambition, Aksum expands its influence westward. Greek and Roman geographers write admiringly of this new power one that trades with India, controls Red Sea ports, and mints its own coins. Aksum's king, Ezana, is a pivotal figure in this new era. In the mid-4th century CE, Ezana adopts Christianity, aligning his kingdom with the Roman Empire and signaling a major transformation in African religious life. Inscriptions written in Ge'ez, the classical Ethiopian language, describe Ezana's military campaigns. Among them is a fateful expedition into Kushite territory. Around 350 CE, Ezana's forces strike into Nubia. The capital city of Meroa, weakened and vulnerable, is targeted. Details are scarce, but archaeological evidence, burned structures, abandoned temples, halted inscriptions, suggests that this invasion dealt a final blow to the already declining kingdom. Meroa is not rebuilt. Its royal pyramids, once surrounded by worship and mourning, fall silent. There is no grand finale, no final king whose name echoes in eternity. Kush fades not in cataclysm, but in erosion. Like stone worn smooth by desert wind, its identity dissolves into the shifting sands. And yet, not all is lost. South of Meroe, in the region known as Nobatia, new kingdoms rise. They are smaller, more localized, and gradually adopt Christianity, following the path of Aksum. Over the next few centuries, Nubia becomes a land of Christian monasteries, sandstone churches, and painted icons. The language of worship changes. The gods of Apetamak and Amun fall silent. Still, echoes of Kush remain. The pyramids are never used again, but they are never forgotten. Travelers and pilgrims speak of them in awe. Greek, Arab, and later European writers marvel at these monuments in the sand. They call the land Ethiopia or Nubia, never quite grasping the full extent of what once was. And in the cultural memory of Sudan, the kingdom of Kush lingers like a lullaby, soft, steady, and enduring. The land itself preserves its secrets. Beneath the soil, tombs rest quietly. In museums, black-topped pottery and lion-headed deities await rediscovery. In satellite images, lost pyramids flicker faintly in the desert. And in every inscription written in Meroitic, there remains a message we have yet to fully understand. Indeed, the Meroitic script is still undeciphered. Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs, whose key came with the Rosetta Stone, Meroitic remains a mystery. Though scholars know how to pronounce the signs, their meanings remain elusive. It is as if the voices of Kush are still speaking but in a dream, just beyond our reach. There is a haunting beauty in that silence. For while Kush may no longer stand, its legacy lives on in its puzzles, its pyramids, and its pride. It reminds us that Africa's ancient past is vast and deep, that civilizations rose not only in Egypt and Mesopotamia, but in the heart of the African continent, rooted in iron, faith, and endurance. The story of Kush is not only about kings and queens, it is about resilience. Resilience in adapting to Egyptian conquest. Resilience in conquering Egypt itself. Resilience in retreating, rebuilding, and creating something wholly new at Meroe. And even in decline, resilience in leaving behind a world of wonders, quiet, vast, and yet to be fully uncovered. Tonight, as you rest, imagine the desert at dusk. The wind flows gently across the face of a forgotten temple. The last sunlight glows orange on the edge of a pyramid. Somewhere beneath the sand, a scribe's inked prayer lies waiting. A name waits to be read. A message waits to be heard. And though centuries have passed, the Kingdom of Kush dreams on. Sleep now, as history folds into darkness, like a scroll returning to its shelf. The desert sleeps, but its memory does not. Though Kush faded from view, its spirit lingers in stones, in silence, and in the slow unfolding of rediscovery. For centuries after its decline, the Kingdom of Kush drifted into the quiet of historical amnesia. To medieval travelers and mapmakers, Nubia was a land of curiosities, its pyramids mistaken for the work of Egyptians, its gods forgotten, its language unreadable. Yet the sands never fully buried the past. They merely protected it, like a lullaby wrapped in linen. The story of Kush began to stir once more in the 19th century. European explorers, drawn by tales of the Nile, wandered into northern Sudan. What they found surprised even the most seasoned among them. Dozens upon dozens of pyramids, clustered in places like Meroe, Nuri, and El Kuru. These pyramids were smaller and steeper than their Egyptian cousins, yet unmistakably regal. The explorers noted inscriptions in a script they could not understand, painted chambers with stars on the ceiling, and statues unlike any they had seen before. This was not Egypt. It was something else, something older in some places, newer in others. A civilization that had learned from the north, but walked its own path. Slowly, archaeologists began to piece together the fragments. They found the temples of Apetamak, the lion-headed god of war and fertility. They uncovered burial goods beads, ivory combs, bronze tools. They studied the architecture of palaces and the layout of cities long lost to time. Excavations at Meroe, Kerma, and Napata revealed layers of life, urban planning, religious centers, iron workshops, and royal courts. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Kush was not a shadow of Egypt. It was a light in its own right. And yet, much remains unknown. To this day, the Meroitic script, the writing system developed by the later Kushiteshas, not been fully deciphered. Without a bilingual key like the Rosetta Stone, scholars are left with educated guesses. They can pronounce the letters but cannot reliably translate the words. Every inscription is a whisper behind a veil, a story we can almost hear. Perhaps that is fitting. For the legacy of Kush is not just in what we know, but in what we still seek. It reminds us that history is not a fixed archive, but but a living field of wonder open to new voices, new tools, new interpretations. In modern-day Sudan, the memory of Kush is reclaiming its place. Sudanese archaeologists, historians, and artists are now leading the exploration of their own ancient past. Local communities are preserving sites, guiding visitors and telling their stories. Pyramids at Meroe are no longer just ruins, they are symbols of identity. For many Sudanese, especially those from Nubian heritage, the Kingdom of Kush is a source of pride, a reminder that African civilizations were advanced, powerful, and central to world history. Museums across the world now house Kushite artifacts, statues of queens, gold jewelry, carved lion stelae. In Berlin, London, Khartoum, and Boston, fragments of this ancient kingdom sit under glass, radiating quiet dignity. Yet the heart of Kush remains in the land itself, in the curve of the Nile, in the shifting dunes, in the stillness that surrounds sacred places. And so we come to the end of our journey. From Kerma's earliest roots, through the Napatan conquest of Egypt, to the golden age of Meroe and the twilight of empire, the story of the Kingdom of Kush stretches across millennia. It is a tale of resilience and innovation, of conquest and culture, of decline and rediscovery. More than anything, it is a story of continuity. For even in disappearance, Kush left behind a legacy that could be felt, not always seen, an inheritance of memory, structure, and spirit. As we drift away into sleep, let us carry that thought with us, that even when buried, stories remain, that even in silence, voices endure, that even in the dark, there is light to be found. The Nile flows on, its waters dark and deep. The stars wheel overhead, just as they did above Meroe's pyramids. And the Kingdom of Kush, once thought lost, breathes again in our dreams. Good night.